My name is Shinya Goto, and I'm the district superintendent of the Los Rios district. I'm also the dean of the cabinet. I am so excited about the team that we have of the presenters and people that are working on this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to David. If you could use a few words to introduce yourself.
And I am the district superintendent for the Central
but
Valley
my
District.
camera's not working.
And I am so glad and so blessed to be here with you all.
Great. And we have two other presenters, Jessie Conklin, if you want to introduce yourself. You probably know her because she was District AA for 3 of our districts. Jessie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I am Jessie, and I was serving as the District AA for Central Valley, Los Rios, and the Great Northern District. Last year I did that. Just recently, I've transitioned to be the admin for Young People's Ministry, camping, disaster response, and UMVIM. So now I'm over in programming, but I am here to share what I have learned with all the forms and all of that going on so that I can help you guys know what's going on with forms.
Great. Thank you, Jessie. And we have one more presenter, Roxanne. She put it all together. I'm so thankful. Roxanne, if you want to introduce yourself. There's a dog in there somewhere.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Roxanne from Florin UMC, now working with the leadership development as the resources consultant. I didn't, just to preface, I did not put this all together. There's a brilliant team of people who have done every aspect to bring all of this together. I will be speaking later on as to the resources that we've gathered that you all can refer to. I'll be speaking toward the very end of this. Thank you. Welcome. Happy you're here.
Thank you, Roxanne. And we have 2 people that are working on tech. It is so important to have tech people these days. And one is JC. If you could just wave, JC. All right, you might not be able to see her. And we have Rebecca McGuire, who's working with us, working on the text. And so thank you so much for doing this. One bishop told me healthy churches have a strong SPRC. You could almost measure the health of the church by looking at its SPRC. And I'm not trying to put any more pressure on you than you already have because you have a lot of work to do, but just to say thank you for being here because it is so important what you're doing. And so thank you for being here. This training is going to be 4 hours. It's very long. It's probably the longest training that I've ever been part of, but we're going to have breakout rooms. We're going to have health breaks. We're going to have discussions, Q&A. So hopefully it's not going to feel too long, but I can tell you, even with 4 hours, we're not going to be able to cover everything. We'll try to cover as much as possible, but we're not going to be able to cover everything. This is my 6th year as a superintendent. And in my experience, I've seen SPRC struggle in 3 areas of the work of the SPRC. 3 areas. The first is evaluation of their pastor. The second is understanding of the itinerancy. And the third is developing and identifying new ministerial candidates. I think a lot of SPRCs don't know that that's their job as well. And so we're going to try to focus on those 3 areas, but we're going to go beyond those 3 topics, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to JC and just talk a little bit about the use of the tech for today's training. JC?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So for those of you who have been doing Zoom for church, you might be familiar with some of this, but for those of you who haven't, it'll be really helpful for us when we're in these big kind of group moments if you are able to stay muted. We will do our best to kind of stay on top of it, but there's a lot of you, which is great. But if you can try to stay muted in this space, that would be great. And then when you go into breakout rooms, you're welcome to unmute yourself and chat with your fellow siblings in Christ who are here with us. If you have any questions as we go throughout the training, please put them in the chat. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a row of buttons that say things like chat or share screen and that kind of thing. You do not need to share your screen at all throughout this session, but you are welcome to put any questions that you have throughout the training into the chat, and we have someone who's keeping track of those. And then at the end, our DSs will do their best to answer any of those questions that have come up. Also, there is a closed captioning function, which means if you are having trouble understanding someone or hearing what's being said, you can turn that on and it'll be just like the subtitles on your TV. So there's a button that says closed captioning. You just click on that and it'll turn on for you. If you have any tech questions throughout this time, again, you can put them in the chat, and those of us who are in tech support will do our best to support you throughout this process. I think that's everything. Back to you, Shinya.
Thank you, JC. And I just want to let you know that we'll make all these slides available to you. This is a question that's asked often. We're going to make these slides available to you. So you don't really have to be writing it all down. It's just so you know. And so with that, we're going to start with opening prayer. I'm going to ask Pastor DS David to lead us in the opening prayer.
Let us be in the spirit of prayer. Gracious, loving, forgiving, creator God, we thank you for your amazing power and work in our lives. Thank you for your goodness and for the blessing of this new day. And thank you for your mercy and your grace. We are grateful and thankful that you're always with us and will never leave us. Thank you that you are able to bring hope through even the toughest of times. Strengthen us for your purposes. This morning, as we virtually gather together at this forum as your servants, joining from all over our conference, we pray that you help us to be grounded in our why we serve. We are your servants, and your purpose for us is to serve you through serving others. We pray that you help us, inspire us, and equip us so that we serve you better through serving others with all that we are and with all that we have.
The end of the prayer was muted, but I hope you were able to get most of it. As we begin, we're gonna get into breakout rooms. I don't know if you had a chance to be part of the worship last night. It was a powerful, powerful worship. Michelle Pope and Blake Busick and district lay leaders, George Beckman and others led us in worship. And then they talked about the why, right? Why we do what we do. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up into breakout rooms, and then we're just going to take 5 minutes. And there'll be 5 people in your breakout room, hopefully. And then I ask each of you to share your reflection from last night's why in just a couple of sentences. So please make sure that everyone gets to share. And so let's go, breakout room. Welcome back. I think people are trickling back into the main room. We'll just wait for another 30 seconds or so for everyone to come back.
Reported.
Great. I think everyone is back. You know, I've heard people say churches should operate like a business. Has anybody heard that before? Churches should operate like a business. And people mean different things when they say that. For some people, it means that the churches should not end the budget in the red, which I appreciate. For some, it means the churches need to be a little more professional in the way
You're muted. You're muted. Oh, send him a text.
Right. We're gonna work on this. We'll get better by the end of 4 hours. But it's important that we see where management belongs in the movement of the church. A few years ago, I went to a training that was led by Doug Anderson, and maybe some of you have taken his trainings before, and he teaches about life cycle of a church. And according to Doug, you can see it on the chart, when a church begins, it begins with a vision, right? Compelling, inspiring vision. That's how it begins. And then people begin to gather around the vision, people that are inspired by that vision, gather around that vision. And so it starts with a vision and relationship is added. And when you have people that are added, that are gathered around that vision, you naturally begin to have programs. I think we have a little bit of sound issue here. All right, could we mute? I'm not sure. Okay, I hope everyone can still hear me. And so it begins with the vision and a relationship is added. And when you have people that are gathered around that vision, programs begin to emerge. You can imagine that, right? Programs begin to emerge. And when you have programs that are happening, you begin to naturally have management because you have to deal with finances, you have to deal with buildings, etc. And so when a church is operating at its best, when a church is vital, it has vision, relationship, programs, and management. But of course, like everything else, it begins to decline. And when it begins to decline, the first thing that goes, I want you to think about it, the first thing that goes, what do you think it is? It's the vision. It's the vision that become less effective. It's not impacting the way that it used to impact the church. And so without the vision, you're probably not going to notice that something has changed because you still have relationship programs and management. But when the vision stops impacting the people that it used to, the way that it did before, relationship becomes kind of scattered, right? It used to be the vision that was bringing the people together. Now it's not the vision that's bringing the people together. People are just gathered together based on their preferences. But you still have the program and then the management. People are still meeting for their Thursday night choir practice, and then the management is still going. But without the strong ties that are bringing the people together, programs begin to weaken. Right? People are, for the first time, are asking the question, we need to find more people to be part of the program, right? And then programs begin to fall apart. And the last thing the church holds on to is the management. You can see it on the chart. And this is not a congregational development training. And so we're not going to talk about how to fix a church, how to help the church through the life cycle of a church. That's not what we're talking about. But just to remember that it's not the management that leads the church, but it's the vision that leads the church, and it's management that follows. So we're going to get to, with that, we're going to get to the basic resources of the SPRC. There are 3 resources that you just have to have every time you're meeting as an SPRC. And so we're going to cover those. The first is the guidelines for pastor-parish relations. You can find it through Cokesbury. I heard that it's $6.99. An e-version is $6.99. The paperback version is $3.99. And so if you skip one day of Starbucks coffee, you can purchase it. There's no excuse. You should be able to have that. It's an important book. It's very short, so I want you to purchase it. If you could purchase it for every member of the SPRC, that'll be even better. The second is the Book of Discipline. Maybe you don't have a copy of the Book of Discipline. The church should have a copy of the Book of Discipline, and it's offered through Cokesbury. I believe that there is online version too. I'm not really sure if it's legal or not, but it's out there. And the part that I want you to pay attention to is paragraph 258.2. and that's where it talks about the work of the SPRC. And the third resource that I want you to look for is standing rules in the conference journal. And it's offered for free. Just to explain what the standing rules is, the Book of Discipline is for the denomination, and the standing rules is for our conference. And it's available for free. If you go to the conference website, the website is cnumc.org, cnumc.org, and you click on the resources on the right top right hand corner, and then you click on journal. You click on journal, and then you click on 2022 journal. Then you get a PDF version of the conference journal for 2022, and it comes out every year. And the journal is about 500 pages. And if you get to about midsection, you're going to find standing rules. And then there you're going to find rules on compensation, housing, health insurance, and etc. And then so if you have these three resources by your side when you have an SPRC meeting, that will be great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about membership.
All right, thank you. This is the membership for the Staff Parish Relation Committee. If you are new to the committee, some ask how many members the committee should have, and it should have at least 5 members, and between 5 and 9 persons for the committee. And one shall be a young adult. So note the language. One shall be a young adult, and one may be a youth. So depending on how you define young adult in your context, make sure that you have a young adult as a member of the SPRC.
Well, we have a official definition of young adults in the United Methodist Church. Do you know what age range it is for young adults? Does anybody know? You can write it in the chat room if you think you know the answer. The age range for young adults in the United Methodist Church, 18 to 35. I see 35, 18 to 35. Any other guesses? 30 to 60. Oh, come on. 30 to 60. By the way, JC, you don't get to answer this because you're the director of young people. But the age range is actually post high school. It could be 18 or 19, all the way up to 30. And so maybe about 19 to 30, that's the age range for young adults. I do think that our conference stretches this a bit. I feel like I was a young adult until my 40s. I feel like I was called a young adult until my son went into high school. But just so you know, it's 19 to 30. Go ahead, David.
All right. Also, the members must be professing members. You cannot have somebody, constituents of the congregation for 3-4 years who served faithfully and become a member if that person is not a professing member. They can serve in other areas of the congregation, but they cannot be member of the Staff Parish Relation Committee. The classes need to be divided into 3-year classes, and this is to maintain the stability for the committee and experience. Lay member and lay leader are members and have a voice and vote in the committee. This is in addition to the 5 to 9 members. Pastors should be present unless they excuse themselves, or if DS is in attendance. So you cannot meet without the pastor. I know sometimes SPRC just call a meeting without the pastor. That is a no-no. You cannot meet without the pastor unless the pastor excuse himself or herself, or a district superintendent is present. Members cannot be staff members. So if you are a lay leader and you are paid, you cannot be, you either be a lay leader and not paid, or paid and be not a member of the committee. No more than one immediate family member from the same household be a member of the SPRC, and immediate family and members of the pastor or staff cannot be a member of the committee. So if you are a spouse or children of the pastor, you cannot serve in the SPRC committee. Shinya?
Okay, so these rules seem pretty simple, right? But you'll be amazed to know how many SPRCs are not following them. And so please remember to follow these rules. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about meetings. You should meet at least quarterly, but preferably more often than 4 times a year. And this becomes apparent when we look into committee's responsibilities a little bit later. There's a lot of things that the SPRC is asked to cover. And so we're going to get to that in a minute. Written minutes of decisions and actions, they're needed for the record. Pastor present, unless they excuse themselves. DS David talked about that a while ago. Only with knowledge of the pastor or district superintendent. May meet with the district superintendent without pastor or appointed staff with due notice before and sharing immediately after. And I want to share why it is important when that they meet with the pastor present. Usually the reason why SPRCs want to meet without the presence of the pastor is because they have concerns about the pastor and they're not sure if they could tell the pastor directly. And that is exactly the reason why SPRCs can't meet without the presence of the pastor, because we need to develop a culture of direct communication. I come from a culture of indirect communication. Raise your hand if you come from a culture of indirect communication. I was born and raised in Japan, and in Japan, if someone has a negative view of you, they're not going to tell you directly. It'll come out in the most roundabout way possible. But as difficult as it is, even culturally, the SPRCs have the responsibility to share their concerns directly with their pastor. And so DS David is going to explain this a little bit further, a little more. Go ahead, David.
Well, thank you, Shinya. Well, as you all know, that one of the many blessings that we enjoy in our conference is the fact that we are among the most diverse conference in our connection. And the diversity is reflected not only in the conference, but also in our districts and in our local churches. And in that context of diversity, we as member of the Staff Parish Relation Committee and clergy members oftentimes find ourselves trying to navigate and negotiate with all the nuances and differences within that context of diversity. And one of the areas the SPRC will be dealing with all the time is communication, as you heard DS Shinya talk about the indirect and direct context. So one of that area is communication, and especially if you are in a cross-racial, cross-cultural context, you'll find it to be so much fun and sometimes so frustrating at the same time. It is important to know the communication style of who you're working with. You know, there are several styles of communication, but the 2 most common styles of communication are the direct and indirect communication. Now, as a Tongan myself, I can tell you that about 99.999 of our Tongan pastors, well, there's still the 0.001 that are not, but most of us, if not all, are indirect communicators. So if your pastor is a Tongan, you now know his or her communication style. And if you serve a congregation that has Tongans, you need to learn how to communicate with indirect communicators. Now, when you ask an indirect communicator a question, or for a favor that needs a simple yes or no answer, good luck. You're not going to get it, at least right away. You know, the answer may come in the form of a story or in the form of a song. And what's frustrating is that at the end of the story, you may still don't know what the answer is. And talk about being frustrated. You know, a congregation was complaining about the pastor's sermon. And the pastor's sermon is usually 25, sometimes 30 minutes long. And it was brought to the attention of the SPRC. And at one of the SPRC meeting with the pastor, the issue was raised and talked about with the pastor, but the pastor didn't respond, just smiled. And the meeting was over. A week later, pastor had a small group meeting and mentioned the complaint. And he told the small group that he was with, this is how I preached. I can't change the way I preach. So that word got around to the staff parish relation committee. Now, it would have been very helpful if the pastor responded to the concern at the meeting, and they could have dealt with it right there and then. But you see, that's a challenge for an indirect communicator to be direct. Or the SPRC could learn how to communicate in an indirect way. You know, instead of saying, Pastor, your sermon is too long, you know, you could have said, Pastor, the 49er is playing the Cowboys tonight at 3 o'clock. And it is going to be a great game. And I tell you, the pastor would have picked that up right away. Now, communication is important. Know the communication style of who you're working with, and try to move to somewhere in the middle where the issues can be addressed in a timely manner and in a peaceful and Christian-like way. So hope you'll enjoy the game. Yay, go Nina. Thank you, Shinya.
Okay, thank you, David. Just so you know, so if you get stuck, please let your DS know. But as difficult as it is, even culturally, the SPRCs have the responsibility to talk about difficult subject, right? Talk about the concerns directly with their pastors. I want you to remember that. And if you have a difficulty, pray about it as well. But this is what we're called to do. The last thing, this is the only group in the church that could meet in a closed session. All the other committees are open to all members, right? There are people that can vote, but all members are not invited, but could join a meeting. But this is the only committee, SPRC is the only committee that could meet in a closed session. And so we're going to move on and talk about confidentiality.
All right, folks, this is a very, very important issue, the issue of confidentiality. In some culture, confidentiality, you say confidentiality and somebody says, what is confidentiality? You know, issues are discussed during meetings, not between meetings, not at a parking lot, not at the Phi Kava circle, not anywhere. In the meeting, that's where issues are discussed, and all matters under discussion are kept in strict confidence. And if you cannot keep confidence, well, at least have the integrity to resign from the committee. You know, there are people who just cannot keep a secret or keep confidence, and pastor nomination committee need to know those and should not serve on the committee in the first place. Any joint statements need to be owned by everybody. It's when the committee make a decision, it's a committee decision, not an individual decision.
So I want to talk a little more about joint statements owned and shared by all members. I want you to take a moment to think about this. What does that mean? Joint statements owned and shared by all members. So here's what it is. At the end of the year, this is just an example. At the end of the year, SPRC has the task of coming up with a recommendation for their pastor, for their appointment, for the next appointment year. It's a very difficult decision. And then let's say the SPRC is gathering together and they take a vote, and 6 members vote in favor of having the pastor be moved, right? Recommending the pastor to be moved, and 2 people vote to have the pastor remain. And so the decision is to recommend to have the pastor be moved from their congregation. And you know that that's a decision that they're supposed to share afterward with their pastor. The person that is sharing that information with the pastor cannot say, I voted for you to stay, but the others voted to have you be moved. They can't say that, right? It's tempting to say that, want to say that, but they can't say that. The answer is to say, we voted to have you be removed. Even if you didn't vote that way, you have to say we voted, right? It's a joint statement owned and shared by all members. Otherwise, the committee is going to be divided, right? Others cannot know how you voted. It's one vote, right? Joint statement owned and shared by all members. This is so important. So I invite you to just be thinking about that. So we're going to move on to talk about characteristics of effective SPRCs. This was created by the Virginia Conference. It's now used by other conferences as well, and it's very helpful. And so effective SPRCs do this. They meet regularly and often. They stay focused on agenda and identity. They're not saying, what do we talk about today? Where's the agenda? Do we have an agenda for today's meeting? No, they don't do that, right? They already have the agenda that they have agreed upon, right? They establish partnership with the pastor, keep pastor informed. So you know the evaluation should not be done just one time at the end of the year, right? If they have concerns about the pastor, that should be shared with the pastor throughout the year. And so the evaluation should not be a surprise at the end. And they have the we are in this together attitude and provide support and understanding. So invite you to take a moment and write in the chat room, and this is going to be a test to see how well we do this. What is we are in this together attitude? What does that look like? I invite you to write your answer in the chat room. Advocacy for the pastor and staff. We are one. Oh, just kind of lost that. We support one another. We are a team. We're working together for the good of, I just gotta keep going. All right. These are all great. Stay focused, working together. We are supportive. That is all good. That is all good. All right, thank you all. So we're going to move on to the characteristics of ineffective SPRCs. David?
All right, folks, if you don't know if your SPRC committee is ineffective or not, and this is how you find out if yours is ineffective. If you only meet like once a year to do the annual evaluations, you are ineffective. When you withhold regular feedback and you let issues build too long to be addressed, and related to when we more concerned about the salary and appointment decisions more than the support of the ministry into growth, then you know your SPRC is ineffective. Also allow too little time and care for the ministry, insufficient time to do the task well, and insufficient care in getting input and preparing for evaluation. So those are the signs that you know that your committee is ineffective. Also, behave unfairly. When you bring unevaluated complaints, you need to look at the complaints and look for facts before you bring those into discussion. Also, when you bring anonymous complaints, that's behaving unfairly. You don't need.
Can I say a little bit? Can I speak a little bit about anonymous complaints? Is that all right, David?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, friends, what do you do with anonymous complaints? I'm sure you've received one or two or more. What do you do with anonymous complaints? I want you to take a moment to think about that. And here's what I want to tell you. You don't deal with anonymous complaints. That's the answer. You don't deal with anonymous complaints. If the person is not willing to stand by the complaint and engage in finding a constructive solution, then you don't deal with it, right? Essentially, the person bringing the complaint is saying, you need to listen to me, but you don't get to respond to me, which is not fair. Now, the only exception is this. The only exception is that when there's a yes or no answer. And I give you an example. I believe if the anonymous complaint says, I believe the pastor sexually abused a member of the church, it's something that you do need to investigate. But for, if the complaint is saying, I don't like the pastor doing this, I don't like the pastor's preaching, if it's an anonymous complaint, you don't engage. Okay, thanks, David.
All right. Also, you don't give all sources equal credibility. There are sources that you don't need to consider. But when you give all sources equal credibility, that's not that's unfair. That's behave unfairly, and also doesn't put issues in perspective. So it is very crucial that when issues being addressed, it need to be in perspective and make sure that all sources are not equal.
Okay, so we're gonna take a 10-minute break, and after that, we're gonna talk about what unevaluated complaints are. That the SPRCs operate like a filter, right? That's what they're supposed to do, to be a filter for the church and to protect the vision and mission. So we're going to come back and talk about that. I invite you to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at about 10 o'clock. Back, we're going to get started because we have a lot to cover. Just so you know that we're going to be having a Q&A session at the end of the training. And then so if you have questions, I invite you to write them in the chat room, and we're not going to answer them at this point, but we'll answer all these questions at the end. And so we're talking about evaluation. How does an SPRC evaluate their pastor? And it really, what we're arguing is that it should be based on their vision and mission. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of stories. That right there, the young, handsome pastor, his name is Jay Cook. Pastor Jay Cook was appointed to the church, Willow Glen United Methodist Church, in January of 2021. And he spent his first year meeting the congregation members and learning about the new church, and it was during the pandemic that he started, and so the capacity to do things was kind of limited, and I feel bad for all the people that had to start a new appointment in the pandemic time. But after a year, he discovered two things about his church. One, this was a church that liked to get involved in mission and outreach. And I think there are many churches that are like that. This was a church that liked to get involved in mission and outreach. The second thing that he learned about this church, Willow Glen United Methodist Church, was that this was a church that could potentially attract young families because of the location of the church and the fact that the church had a strong preschool program. So the idea the pastor brought to the church was, let's become a church where everyone is engaged in ministry. That's the idea that he brought to the church. Let's become a church where everyone is engaged in ministry. And this was very smart, because the data shows when young people come to church, they often feel like an outsider. Or worse, they get invited to be part of SPRC committee or board of trustees or finance, right? That's not why they come to church, to join a committee. A lot of them join a church because they want to make a difference in the world. By the way, there's a book called Growing Young. If you're looking for a good book for your church to read about becoming young as a congregation, this is a great book. And it talks about how that is exactly what young people are looking for. This is one of the primary reasons why young people come back to church. It is because they're involved in a mission. And so Pastor Jay Cook was right about his vision. And so what he did was, first he shared his idea with the key leaders in the church. That's how you get things started, right? He shared his idea with the key leaders in the church. And then he had a town hall type meeting with the entire congregation to discuss the vision. And what Pastor Jay Cook said to me was, it takes time for a church to buy into a new vision. And so you work on it from different angles. And so I invite you to take a look at the next slide. They wanted to find a good rhythm to spread out, spreading out throughout the year to institute the changes. And the next slide shows the calendar for the year to how to implement the change. So within their timing for living into their vision, one thing the church did was very bold, very bold. They took out the front pews, put a rug down and set some tables and chairs, and they created a space that was comfortable for children and their parents. And it also sent a strong message, right, to young families that they're welcome. And so I think there's a photo of the front part of the sanctuary. There you go. And then here's another thing that they did. It was very bold. They got rid of worship bulletins. And you notice it's usually the church members that love their bulletins. But people who did not grow up in a church don't really care about worship bulletins. And a lot of the new churches and the churches with young people don't really have worship bulletins. And so it comes back to the question is, what is it that your church is trying to do? What Willow Glen did was they made the church as comfortable as possible for new people to join in, especially young families. And two, they made it easier for new people to join their mission and outreach. And so they feel like they belong. And so this was a church that had about 60 people worshiping on Sundays. But since 2021, they had 11 new families that joined. And so it's an amazing thing that's happening at Willow Glen. And so the question that I want you to answer in the chat room is, what should be the appropriate response of the SPRC when a church member says to the committee, I don't like it that we don't have bulletins anymore, or the front pews were taken out? What should be the appropriate response of the SPRC when a church member says to the committee, I don't like it that we don't have bulletins anymore, or that the front pews were taken out? I invite you to answer that question. It is important for churches to adapt and new practices and meet people where they are. I love that. Find out why that decision was made. Yeah, that's important. Sorry that you feel that way. I think that's a little more pastoral care approach. That's good. Let us be invitational to new families. Good, good, good. I need to make the chat room bigger so I can read all these comments. It is important to follow the vision of our pastor at this time. Let's try and see how it works. Good. And then, so how should the SPRC evaluate the performance of their pastor, right? That's the question that we have. It should be based on how far, how effectively the pastor is able to lead the church toward their goal from their vision and mission. How does an SPRC evaluate the pastor when they don't have a clear vision? One person is going to say, I only care about pastoral care, right? And that's how I'm going to evaluate the pastor. Another person is going to say, I only care about the pastor's involvement in the community, and that's how I'm going to evaluate. Another person is going to say, I only care about pastors preaching. That's all that I care about. It's going to be based on their preferences. And it's not the helpful evaluation, because it's going to be all over the place. And pretty soon that pastor is going to try to please all the SPRC members. But rather than doing that, if you have a clear vision and mission, that's how you evaluate, right, the work of the pastor. And so we're going to move on to the next example. You can see something good happening in this church. This is a Fijian congregation in Sacramento, Wesley United Methodist Church. They doubled the congregation size in a little over 3 years. The church grew from 40 people in 2019 to over 80. And the first picture right there is a picture of their celebration. They're Fijians, and so they have many celebrations, and they have food at every celebration. And the next picture is their youth ministry. They're very active. They're always taking trips, doing fun things. That's their youth ministry. And their vision is very different than Willow Glen UMC. They're all about teaching and training. And you can see that in their slide. You could turn to the next slide. The mission is to restore to the heart of Hope United Methodist, it should be Wesley United Methodist Church, a great commission passion. To do that, their strategy is to train leadership in Great Commission priorities, resulting in healthy Christians with a balance of winning, building, and equipping priorities. To do this, they believe the pastor needs to focus on, the next slide, please, being a spiritual leader, worship leader, preacher and teacher. The pastor needs to train the laity, lead administratively, and steward the vision, become the custodian of institutional integrity, participate in the UN connection, and be the community minister. That's quite a bit, right? That's quite a bit. But the focus is equipping the lay people, and that's how the SPRC evaluates the work of the pastor. Having a vision that helps with that evaluation. You know where you're going, therefore you get to measure how far you have gone with the leadership of the pastor. So we're gonna go into breakout room for, actually this is gonna be pretty long. It's gonna be for 20 minutes. Discuss the vision of your church, or if the church does not have a clear vision, is there something that is stirring up in you, perhaps now that you've heard about Willow Glen UMC and Wesley United Methodist Church, or vision that you hope your church would adopt? And so please be sure to have everyone share in your breakout room. And so this is going to be a 20-minute. You missed. I just kept talking, but I hope you had a great conversation in your breakout room. And if you want to share a little bit about what you heard and what you shared in the chat room, I would love to see what happened in your breakout room. I hope you had a great conversation.
I'd like to share a little bit. I think
well, if you could write it down in the, I'm sorry, Tony, because we have so many people here. If you could write it down in the chat room, is that all right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, if you could write it down, that'd be great. I hope you had a great conversation. And some people said we don't know our vision, church vision. And I suspect that a lot of churches don't have a clear vision and something that they could work on, right? Felt very encouraged hearing the wonderful work our sibling churches are doing. Glad to hear that. A common thread is growing the church and attracting younger families and the youth. Good. It sounds like y'all had a wonderful conversation. Visions need to be revisited every few years to stay fresh. That's good. All right. So we're gonna move on, and we're gonna talk about how SPRC works with the pastor. For SPRC's work to be effective, SPRC needs to have good partnership, right, with the pastor. And what does that look like? That's what we're going to cover. And then so, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Shinya. You may have already noticed from your conversation or from the examples that that you've seen earlier, how it is crucial, important for the SPRC and the clergy to work together as a team. So what SPRCs need from clergy, cooperation, receptivity. The SPRC need a pastor, one from a pastor who is willing to listen and with an open mind. A pastor who attempt to understand members' concerns, an openness to improvement in ideas, clear and open communication. Pastor need to communicate the vision for the ministry and very candid assessment of what is going on in the church. So those are the things that SPRC sort of expect from the pastor.
Yes, I know that we have pastors and ministers that are part of this training. And so it's important that you think about those things, pastors and ministers. And so here's a difficult question. Are you ready? And invite you to write your answer in the chat room. What do you do when the pastor is not willing to listen with open mind? What do you do when the pastor is not willing to listen with open mind? I want you to take a moment to think about that and write your answer in the chat room. Pray about it. Yeah, prayer. Get super involved. Be direct. Say a prayer to God, ask Him for a solution. Call the DS. Yes, all of the above. I want you to know it is okay to call your DS if you can't move forward in your partnership with the pastor. And then DS is going to try to get in there and work with the pastor and the SPRC. And so please feel free to call your DS. And, SPRC is the one committee that the DS tries to develop a closer relationship with. And so it's okay to reach out to your DS. So the next question is, what clergy needs? What do they need from the SPRC, right? It goes both ways, what SPRC needs from the clergy, and this time we're going to talk about what clergy needs from the SPRC. Again, it's because it's a partnership. Clergy needs honest feedback, balanced, objective, thoughtful, prayerful, and candid feedback. My hope and prayer is that, the clergy is going to be receptive to criticisms, but you want that to be constructive criticisms, not negative criticisms. Personal concern and support, advocate for pastor. SPRC has the responsibility of being an advocate for the pastor. Communication with the congregation, education of congregation. Do you see that? Education of congregation. This is so important. We're going to come back to that later. But the SPRC has the responsibility of educating the congregation. And so what do they educate about? And so we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. Feedback from and to congregation. And so that's important. So the next question that I want to ask you is, I'm going to invite you to spend a few minutes and write down your answer in the chat room what it means to be and what it means for SPRC to be an advocate for the pastor. What does it mean to be an advocate for the pastor? I invite you to write down your answer in the chat room. Positive talking, suggestion of growth in church, hear all concerns, focused on vision, empathize. Oh, they're moving too quickly. I can't follow. Be an encourager, introduce the pastor to church and community. Thank you, pastor, and thank your pastor in front of the congregation. That's good. That's really good. Support congregation, inner, I don't know what that is. Inner, okay. Honest discussions of issues. Oh, that is good. Honest discussions of issues. Find out what the pastor needs from us and how we can help the pastor succeed. Oh, that's great. Listen for indirect communication. Yep, that is important, especially in cross-cultural settings. Be her encourager. Help point members in need of, oh, I missed that one. Skip moving up. Standing up for your pastor when they are in the room. Share pastor's vision. Oh, those are all great. Thank you. Thank you. Great comments. And so I think we're doing well in this training. And so what we're going to do, we talked earlier about how much work SPRC has. And so we're going to talk about the overview of what you might be working on for the year. Right, so you get a sense. And so in this model, we're breaking it up into 4 quarters, breaking the year up into 4 quarters. And the first quarter is January to March. And so here are the things that you might want to do in the first 3 months of the year. Hold orientation for committee work. Hopefully you have new members and you want to hold orientation. Set expectations as basis for evaluation in the 4th quarter. So you want to set up the expectation for the year at the beginning of the year. And so you know how you're going to evaluate the pastor in the 4th quarter, right? So the evaluation starts really in the first 3 months. Establish relationship with the congregation, other leaders, staff, ordained deacons, affiliated clergy. So here's a question: who are affiliated clergy? Do you know the answer? I invite you to write it down in the chat room. Who are affiliated clergy? All right, they are retired clergy. There you go. Retired pastors, deacons with the secondary appointments. We have elders and deacons, right? Elders in extension ministry, holding a charge at your church. And some churches have kind of a, what do they call that? Liaison system or a buddy system, right? And so you want to include other pastors, right? That are not maybe appointed to the church, but are holding charge in your congregation. Set pattern to identify ministry candidates. And that's something that we talked about earlier. Each congregation should produce one ministry candidate every 4 years. You know that there's a gap between the number of pastors and number of vacant churches to just keep up with the demands of our churches. In average, one church should be producing one ministry candidate every 4 years. And so if your church hasn't produced a ministry candidate in decades, you know that we need to work on this. And so I want to share a little bit about developing a culture of call. And that is something that the SPRC is not solely responsible for, but it's partially responsible for. And so you want to work with your pastor to develop a culture of call in your congregation. And the first example that I want to share is from Pinole United Methodist Church. And you know where Pinole is. I'm trying to describe it. I think it's north of San Francisco. I might be a little wrong in that description, but they have about 80 to 100 in worship. And the pastor is Pastor Elmar Diosera. If you know who Henry Pablo III is, he came out of this church. He went to Pacific School of Religion and is now serving as the pastor of Dixon United Methodist Church. He's doing a wonderful job. Another person is Peter Katigbuk. He is currently going through the district candidacy process. He came out of Pinole United Methodist Church, and they have a young person from this church who went to Biola University, was thinking about going into ministry, but now teaching at a Christian school. And there are two deaconesses, Ellen Dizon and Josefina Pablo, who is Henry Pablo's mother. And so they have all these people that are going into ministry in one way or another. And so I asked the pastor, Pastor Elmar, what do you do to develop a culture of call? What do you do to develop a culture of call? And he said something very, very interesting that I want to share with you. He said, I never tell people to go into ministry. That's what he said. I never tell people to go into ministry. And then he added, this is the kind of thing old pastors used to do. And I don't really know which old pastors he's referring to, but he said, today's generation of young people, they don't want to be told to go into ministry. And he said, what I do is this. What I do is I just name their gifts and talents and encourage them to use their gifts for the work of God's kingdom. I thought that was brilliant. And I thought it's even better if you heard from Elmar directly. And then, so there's a video that I want to show you. Here it is.
Blessed day to everyone, to you, my brothers and sisters. My name is Elmar Diosera, and I am the servant leader at Pinole United Methodist Church. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you and hopefully they can help you and they can help all of us as we look forward, as we think about the future of our ministry, not only here in the California Nevada Annual Conference, but the global church as well. So I always thought, I was given the impression that to be in ministry is to be a pastor, to be an ordained elder. And that was impressed upon me. But as I started doing ministry within the church, I found out that there are areas that are equally important and vital in the life and ministry of the church. But the thing about it is how do we create that environment? How do we create that culture? So I'd like to suggest some of the things that I have done, some of the things that worked. I hope they will work for you as they did for me. So number one is create an environment of call. An environment of call where you start them young. Let the children know that God gave them gifts because of God's love for them and for us. Let them know that they can share even by sitting next to another person, a new child, a new kid who's come to church, giving them a cookie and sharing what they have. Create an environment where each person's gift, whether children, youth, young adults, is precious and valuable, and to use their gifts to strengthen our relationship with God and with each other. We can do a lot of different things within the church setting as well. If you're good at singing, by all means, share that gift. If you're good at playing an instrument, yes. If you're good at handing out the bulletins, the Sunday program, do it. If you're good at ushering, Do that. Never think that what you're doing is just. You are doing it because you love the Lord, you love God's people, you love the community that you belong to. Encourage people. Encourage each and every person to use the gifts that God has blessed them with. Not for self-gratification, let me tell you, not for self-gratification, but to bring honor and praise to God. And also, just a reminder, an environment of call is never pushing or uses the guilt factor or fear factor. It may or it may not work. God has given each of us a choice. We have been given a free will. A free will to decide, to choose, and prayerfully, hopefully, we heed the call of God. I have been in so many different ministry positions in the church. I have been blessed with a church that has supported me, that has encouraged me, and that has prayed with me as I went through the process and as I went through ministry. So that's why I would always encourage people to look into themselves. What gives them joy? What gives them a satisfaction when they are at church? What are the gifts that they can bring to the table, that they can share? If you are a prayer warrior, by all means, prayer is one of the most vital and important part of the life and ministry of the church. And so that's why I had this last. I didn't want to put it first because I know that we need to be in prayer. The most important is to create an environment of prayer. You, the person seeing and experiencing the gifts and talents of other people, pray for the power of the Holy Spirit to touch every person's heart and mind. That each person to willingly use their gifts and to share them with others. Pray that as they share these gifts, God will speak to them in a clear and audible voice for them to hear what God's plan is for their lives. For God delights in what they are doing, and definitely God will guide them as they surrender their lives, as they offer their gifts and their talents for the use and for the kingdom of God. And listen to where God is telling them and where God is leading them. And pray that they will be filled with joy as they share their gifts. I hope in this small talk that we have this morning, that you will find joy, and you will find that ministry is all around us. Ministry is where God has given us the gifts, and that ministry and those gifts and talents can be used to encourage, to enhance, and to lift up the spirit of God's people. So thank you very much, and I hope and pray that you will find value in what I have shared with you this morning. God bless you and have a blessed and wonderful day.
Amen, amen. Wasn't that great? You could feel the passion, right, in what he's saying. And by the way, he was struggling with COVID when I asked him to do this. And I thought maybe he wouldn't do it, but he said, I want to do this. I want to be able to share what I think about developing a culture of call. And so he did that while he was struggling with COVID. The next example that I want to share with you is from Martinez United Methodist Church, and the pastor there is Pastor Laumanu Theloke Ika. And this is a church that has a tiny sanctuary. Someday I want to compare all the sanctuary sizes and look for the tiniest sanctuary that we have in our conference. This is a sanctuary that probably seats about 100 people. If it's more than 100, it's not that many more, maybe 110. But this church is growing leaps and bounds. And the church has, hear this, I want you to hear this. The church has 76 children, 76 children. And there's a photo of all the children that are gathered together in this church. I was invited to an event that they had. I think they called it the White Sunday. Children were coming up to the front to perform. They were going to sing and they were going to dance. And I thought it was going to be about half an hour, but it turned out that I was in this thing for 3.5 hours because there's so many children and they kept performing, and it was just wonderful. But out of that church, they have 3 members that are attending seminary in the US, and they have one who's attending a seminary in Tonga, and they have another one who's thinking about going into ministry. And so I asked Pastor Laumanu, what do you do to develop the culture of call? And like Elmar, he said, I don't tell people to go into seminary or go into ministry. But he said this, it's very interesting. He said, what I do is I lead Bible studies. And I asked him, is the topic of the Bible study about answering God's call? And he said, no, I lead 4 Bible studies. Each has about 10 people. And he said, I just try to share theological insights that they have never heard about or thought about. And so they show real interest in scriptures, and they devote themselves to learning and the scripture, and a lot of them end up in seminary. So I thought that's kind of an interesting take on how to develop a culture of call. Another example that I want to share with you, I think we're gonna need to mute. Could we do that? Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. All right, look at that beautiful place. Where is that place?
Right, Monterey.
It's Pacific Grove. This is where all the pastors were this week. You feel sorry for the pastors? You had to spend 3 days in Pacific Grove. And I don't know if you knew this, but Pacific Grove was founded by the Methodists back probably about 150 years ago. This city was founded by the Methodists. And so if you're a clergy person in the United Methodist Church, and if you want to be buried after you die in Pacific Grove, you get a discount, just so you know. And I don't really know what the discount is. Could be 10%, 2%. I don't really know, but you do get a discount so that you know. But it's not a bad deal to be buried in Pacific Grove. I think a lot of your friends and family will probably visit you often. And so it's something to think about. But the church there is Pacific Grove First United Methodist Church. And about 5 years ago, by the way, this Pacific Grove Church is located near military base in Monterey. And 5 years ago, Pastor Pam Cummings was appointed to Pacific Grove First United Methodist Church. And she had the brilliant idea of finding a person married to someone who's stationed at the base to be hired as a children's director. And then so Sherry, whose husband was stationed at the base, was visiting the church. And one day, Pam encouraged her to apply for the job of being a children's director. I think it happened on Sherry's first day at the church, or maybe the second Sunday. I don't really know. But Sherry thought about it and eventually said yes. And Sherry was a phenomenal children's director. And through her connections at the base, she helped to bring many young families to the church. The Sunday school had many kids running around. But Sherry had grown up in Baptist tradition. I don't know what kind of Baptist, but they taught that the women were not allowed to preach. But one day, Pam invited Sherry to preach on Mother's Day. And Sherry was a little bit hesitant at first, but eventually said yes. And people in that church, this was 5 years ago, people in that church still tell me years later that that was one of the best sermons that they had ever heard. It was a passionate sermon where she preached from her heart. And as she was preaching, what happened was she felt a nudging in her heart that God was calling her to ministry. And then so she went to the district committee on ordained ministries, and she became one of the candidates to go into ministry. And because she's part of the military family, they moved to North Carolina. But even after they moved to North Carolina, she was applying to Wesley Theological Seminary, their online program. And then when she got into the seminary, almost overnight, the church raised $12,000, almost overnight, to help her with the tuition for the seminary education. And so I want us to take some time in the breakout room to discuss what your church has done or could do to cultivate a culture of call. I invite you to take 15 minutes. Let's go. Okay, I think everybody's coming back to the main room, and we'll get started. I hope you had great discussion on cultivating a culture of call. So if you want to share what you discussed in the chat room, that'll be great. How did your conversation go? What did you talk about? If you could share some of the comments that you've heard, ideas that you want to share in the chat room, that will be great. Okay. I think people are taking a little bit of time to encourage lay leader ministries. Oh, what a great idea. Recognizing that everyone in the church has a talent to grow and nurture those talents, involvement. What constitutes call? It's a great question. Reach out to everybody who is present. Just to answer that question, I think we're all called one way or another. God is speaking to us, right? Calling us to do something for God's kingdom work. And so reconciling congregations, an effective way to reach call is through small group Bible study. That's a great personal stories. Those are all really great ideas. Offering internship can encourage the call. Great. Yeah. So I hope you had a wonderful conversation. And we're going to finish the overview of the year. So we're going to come back to the last point for January to March, and that is to establish or review plan for dealing with rumors and conflict. If you don't really have a strategy for dealing with rumors and conflict, it's going to be difficult. And so just to have a little bit of time at the beginning of the year to review your plan for dealing with rumors and conflict. Let's go to April to June. All right, this is a great time to review your parsonage. If you have a parsonage, housing issues, leases, conditions of the parsonage, a plan to purchase a parsonage. If you don't have a parsonage, I know that depending on where you live, it might be difficult to purchase a parsonage, purchase a house, but but it'll be great to be thinking about it, planning for it, right? So because it only gets more difficult. The housing cost is going to go up and up and up, and so it only becomes difficult. And so have a plan for purchasing a parsonage. If you don't have a parsonage, that would be great. Conduct legal review, employment laws, exempt versus unexempt employee, the use of cell phones on the job, etc. Right? Conduct legal review, conduct policy review. A safe gathering is a policy that you're supposed to have in your church. And so reviewing the safe gathering so that people are aware of the policy, and that would be great. Review plans and policies for pastoral changes because that tend to happen in this time frame, April to June. And so even if you're not experiencing a pastoral transition, it'll be great to review plans and policies for pastoral changes. And we have some resources that we could share on that as well. We're going to move on to July to September. David?
All right, you come to July through September. Now we just returned from annual conference. And if you have a change of pastors, you start in July welcoming a new pastor, but some are getting ready to take on vacation for summer. But before you do that, you need to review written job descriptions and staffing needs for your congregation. Review the salary and benefit packages, look at the vacation, healthcare, etc. In that package. Establish or review continuing education plans and engage in leadership development. And coming October through December, you have, this is the season of annual church conference or church conference. So conduct the annual evaluation based on the expectations that you set in the beginning of the year. So this is the time you conduct the annual evaluations based on that. Also make reports to church conference, whatever it may be. Hold annual consultation with district superintendents, usually happened at the church conference or the church conference. And then you complete any unfinished business that you need to deal with before you start the new year.
So you can see there's quite a bit of work to do for SPRC, right? And that's why my recommendation is for the SPRC to meet monthly, but definitely at the very least quarterly, and then try to cover as much of the stuff that we talked about as possible. And then after this, we're going to shift gear to talk about itinerancy. And so this is a big topic, and this is important for SPRC to understand on itinerancy. And so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back at 11:34. And then we're going to talk about itinerancy. So 10-minute break. 34, we're going to get started. In this section, we're going to talk about itinerancy. So you see a photo on the screen. Invite you to write down in the chat room who you think the statue is of. I invite you to write it down. Who do you think the statue is of? Everybody's writing down their guesses. John Wesley, JW, Wesley, John Wesley. Too handsome to be Wesley. I'll just, I will not comment to that. John Wesley. All right. Sounds good. You got it right. It's John Wesley. Now we're going to talk a little bit about John Wesley. Did you know that John Wesley wrote one of the all-time best-selling medical texts? I don't know if you knew that. He had a lot of interest in science. The name of the book is Primitive Physics, and it went through 32 editions. So people don't normally think of John Wesley as a scientist, but he clearly was fascinated with the world of science. And here's something that I think speaks into his scientific interest. I want you to hear this. In 1789, John Wesley wrote a letter to Bristol Gazette explaining his suspicion of hops brewed beer. He gave a scientific explanation of why beers don't need hops to be good. This was after he conducted many experiments comparing beer with hops and beer without hops. And in the Primitive Physics, you might not believe this, but in Primitive Physics, he actually gives tips on how to brew a good beer. And it comes from kind of his scientific background. And so I think that's interesting. Another thing that about John Wesley is that you've heard of the term agree to disagree, right? Agree to disagree. It was John Wesley who coined the term agree to disagree. Isn't that interesting? Agree to disagree. And what does that say about the debate that we have, right, in the church about disaffiliation? Something to think about. Next one, I'm not sure if I like, but I'm just going to share it with you. John Wesley counseled people to eat a little less than you desire. Eat a little less than you desire. Actually, in Japanese culture, we have a similar saying, you eat 80% of your stomach capacity. And so it really is about health, right? And so he said, eat a little less than you desire. You might agree with him, you might not agree with him. Here's another one. Methodists grew from 4 people to 132,000 members in Wesley's lifetime. 4 to 132,000 members in Wesley's lifetime. Somebody can do the math and see, you know, how many times the compound, right? How many times it multiplied. But it's quite a bit that it grew during John Wesley's lifetime. Here's another one. John Wesley preached 40,000 sermons and traveled 250,000 miles on horseback. If you do the math, I think it's like 2 or 3 sermons every week. And I think it's like 10 times the circumference of the earth, 250,000 miles on horseback. And so what we know is that John Wesley was clearly an itinerant preacher. He went around and preached, right? Here's a next photo. Can we get to the next photo? All right, here's this one's a little more difficult. I want you to write down in the chat room who you think this is a statue of. Go ahead, write it down. Who is this a statue of? Oh, you guys are all too smart. You guys are all writing some different answers. And so maybe unnamed itinerant preacher. Yeah. And so there's some disagreement. Some are saying Francis Asbury and some are saying Charles Wesley. Any other guesses? Itinerant preacher, circuit preacher? Yeah. All right, so this is a statue of, here it is, the answer, Francis Asbury. And he's one of the first 2 bishops, right, of the Methodist Church. Francis Asbury was one of them. And the other one was, does anybody know? Write it down in the chat room, and if you know the answer. Thomas Coke. That's right, Thomas Coke. And so Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury were the first 2 bishops of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And so if you look at the name Cokesbury, it's these 2 names put together, right? And so they were both itinerant preachers. And so back then, if you're an itinerant preacher, you'd be appointed to a circuit. And then that could be a size of half of a state or more. And appointment might only be for 3 months, and then you go to another circuit. And so itinerancy has been at the core of Methodism since its inception. And it's based on the understanding that it's the lay people, right? It's the lay people that grow churches. And then the pastor offers sacraments. And pastors don't stay in one place, but we're sent out. Pastors are sent out. And then just to add my sense of all of this, my sense is that the denomination, the Methodist denomination, is going to cease to exist before we stop itinerant pastors, because it is ingrained in us. It is part of who we are. It is part of our DNA. So we're going to talk a little bit about itinerancy. We're going to look at itinerancy versus appointment, right? It's a little bit different. You might think it's the same, but they're a little bit different. Itinerancy refers specifically to the commitment by pastors to go and serve wherever their bishop sends them, right? Appointment is the action taken by bishops. And so these are a little bit different and yet related. So we're going to look at open itinerancy. I don't know if you have heard of this term, open itinerancy. Open itinerancy means appointments are made without regard to race, ethnic origin, gender, color, disability, marital status, or age, except for the provisions of mandatory retirement. And so it's important to remember, right, that we have this understanding, this rule in the Book of Discipline about open itinerancy. There's one church that I came across who they had their pastor retire after 10 years or 12 years, pretty long pastorate. And then they were trying to come up with the characteristics of the next pastor that they're looking for. And what they wrote was, we want a young white male pastor who's married and have 3 kids. That was what they asked for. Do you think the bishop honored their request? I'm not going to answer that question, but you can guess, right? And so it's important for all of us to remember that we have this rule called open itinerancy. And so here's what the Book of Discipline says about appointments. I'm going to ask David to lead this part.
The paragraph 425 of the Book of Discipline says, clergy shall be appointed by the bishop, who is empowered to make and fix all appointments in the episcopal area of which the annual conference is a part. Appointments are to be made with consideration of the gifts and evidence of God's grace of those appointed, to the needs, characteristics, and opportunities of congregations and institutions, and with faithfulness to the commitment to an open itinerancy. And Bishop Snace also commented, while bishops make appointment, they incorporate a consultative process outlined in the Book of Discipline that includes district superintendents, pastors, and the SPRC Staff Parish Relation Committee. The needs and desire of clergy are considered, but the mission of the church comes first, according to Bishop Snace.
All right, thank you, David. And so you get the point of itinerancy in appointment making, is that we are sent out, right? It's very missional. It's how our denomination is set up. And so it's very different than congregational system where congregation decides. But in the United Methodism, it's the bishop that sends pastors. And so in regards to itinerancy, the SPRC's responsibility is this. SPRC's responsibility, one, is to uphold the commitment of itinerancy, and 2, teach the congregation about itinerancy, right? because I see that there are a lot of people that are joining Methodist churches, our churches in the conference, who didn't necessarily grow up in the United Methodist environment, and so they're coming from maybe a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church or non-denominational church, or they didn't grow up in a church, they're joining church for the first time. And so it's the responsibility of the SPRC to educate the congregation about itinerancy. And so I invite you in the chat room what your church has done to teach the congregation about itinerancy. If you have an idea to share, we would love to hear it. And so if there's any kind of education that your church has done, I invite you to write it down in the chat room. What I've seen are things like newsletter articles about itinerancy. You could tie it to a sermon about being sent out. Some churches have done small group study on Methodism. Roxanne has some resources to share later on about itinerancy. So we look forward to that. But there are some ways to teach the congregation. And so I want you to be thinking about those things. Okay, so we're going to move on to SPRC forms, and this is really the highlight of the training. That's going to be the most important part. And then so Jessie is going to lead us, and she's done this. She dealt with this every single day, and then so she's going to lead us in the SPRC forms. Jessie.
Hello, everybody. I am going to lead us in SPRC form training. Let's get, this would be a good time. The slides I need to show you, they don't give way for taking, they're not notes, they're not ones that can be shared later. It's going to be more looking at the computer or images of what you would see on your computer when you're taking forms. So go ahead, if you have notes, this would be a good time to take them and take some things down. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you. Okay. So I know that forms are not everybody's favorite area of the service, right? But reports and gathering stats, it's just been going on for a long, long time. We know that even in Mary and Joseph's day, they were traveling for a census when Mary gave birth to Jesus. And I'm hoping that the process of these forms are not going to be as painful as traveling 9 months pregnant by foot or by donkey. Okay, so hopefully this training will help. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, does anybody actually look at these forms? Yes, they do. They absolutely do. And this is very important work. It is worth your time. We're going to look at cnumc.org/dashboards. If you see that up there, this is a place where you will be able to access your people portal. Very important that you log into your people portal around September, October, first thing. Renee is the database coordinator, and this page should have information on what to do if you cannot get your login. Right now, it says if you need to create or have forgotten your username or password, you can contact Renee Teft. She is the contact right now. I know in the past, district admins had some access to help with logins. Right now they don't, might change, but this page will tell you how to get in. You scroll down to the bottom and it actually has the button to access the people portal down here. It might seem kind of deceiving because there's things up above here and people are like, where is it? How do I get in? It's meant so that you read what's on the page before going in so that a lot of your questions might be answered. So you're going to go ahead and access this people portal. So for one thing to note, the pastor's compensation is in the church dashboard. That's confusing to some people. Pastor's compensation is in the church dashboard. So here in your people portal, you can update some of your contact information. You want to make sure that the conference has your email address so that you receive emails, news about these types of trainings, news about when the forms are coming out and when they're due. You want to make sure that there's a way to contact you. And especially with SPRCs, sometimes we have questions about maybe a compensation report or something. You can get a call from your district admin or maybe even a DS, and they'll need to be able to reach you. So we're going to be looking at the church dashboard, appointment forms that the SPRC fill out, and we're also going to briefly cover some conference forms. And we're going to start from the bottom up. Church conference forms. So it's a little bit confusing. You scroll all the way down, and then you eventually get to this area here where you see church conference forms. Some of you may not have to fill these out. Maybe you overlap jobs, and you would. But as SPRC, the form you must complete for your church conference is the compensation report. But the compensation report, as I said, is not here on this page. That seems confusing. Why, if you need the compensation report for your church conference, wouldn't it be with all the other church conference forms? I will tell you why. So the compensation report is something that you can access all year round. These forms, they'll disappear, I think, about February, and then they come back out. But compensation might need to be updated any time of the year. And especially, we have transitions. Pastor appointment season is July. Sometimes new pastors come in July. So you might be working out compensations other times than, for your church conference. Okay. And then you have a special charge conference to work out that compensation. Your compensation report should be turned in 2 weeks before your church conference, at least 10 days. They should be reviewed by your DS and by your district admins to look for mistakes. But we're going to talk a little more about compensation later, okay? So now we're looking at our church conference forms. As you do have access to them, I want to go over them because it's good for you to know if your team is completing them or not. It's ultimately the pastor's responsibility to make sure that their team has submitted the forms. But you can work with the pastor and check on the forms to make sure that if it's not getting done or if there's issues, that you can address any obstacles. Forms do need to be submitted electronically. All of these forms do. The compensation reports, the SPRC evaluations, these church conference forms, they all need to be submitted electronically. I will tell you, I know some people have some issues. Maybe computers aren't your best friends. Work with somebody else. We're a church that we have a team. Work with your pastor to find somebody to come alongside you. Maybe you need somebody else there or somebody else on SPRC with you. Maybe somebody else needs to log in with you and just kind of help you out through it. They do need to be done electronically. So problem solve at your church. All right. So for the most part, all of these forms here, you've got your membership audit, your trustee facility report, report of the trustees. These will be completed before your church conference. You'll probably even have a retired clergy report if you have any, but the meeting minutes, those you need to submit after your church conference. You can't put minutes in before. What happens is, you can see here, there's an error questions here, error messages. This bar down here, right now it's blue and it says started. The thing is, it's kind of tricky because it can come up and tell you it's ready to submit when you're not actually ready to submit. It recognizes certain errors But just because it says you're ready to submit at the bottom doesn't mean you are. So it's happened where occasionally somebody will go and they'll submit their church conference forms, and they didn't submit their minutes yet because they didn't even have their church conference. What you need to do in that case is reach out to your district admin and have them unsubmit the forms. So do wait until after your church conference. Make sure you have your minutes. This blue bar will change and you'll be able to submit the forms. Okay. Let's see here. To get back to your SPRC appointment forms, we're just going to go back here like this, and you can see back here, and now we're going to do the SPRC appointment forms. So this is tricky to some people because they see two different, all the forms are together. They're not. As SPRC, you have access to forms that other people don't, and that's why you have that like that. Okay, so hang in there. Sometimes I have people in their church conference forms and they're calling me. No, they're two separate sets of forms. You just have to go back. All right. Now, you've got your church profile, some assessments, and a recommendation concerning the pastor. I know the church profile is very long. But these forms, all of these forms are on here for a reason. They are important. The appointed cabinet uses these forms to make appointments, and they're also eyes to your church. So if you don't fill out your appointment forms, particularly if you don't fill out your church profile, it's almost like being on a dating website without having a profile. It's going to be really hard to make a match. There's power of the Holy Spirit who can move people to make decisions, but it really helps to have your prayerful insight into your church. I know that some people have issues because the church profile is long. I will say the church profile is one that you cannot probably fill out on your own as an SPRC. You really need your team to work on it with you. There's financial questions. So go ahead, log in right away, get all the information that you need to gather, work with your team to fill it out. And even if you don't think that you'll be getting a new pastor this year, you never know what's going to happen. And things can sometimes also happen mid-year. You just never know. This evaluation is good for you to do. We all need to kind of check and take stats once in a while. And this is a good prayerful thing for you guys to consider. And when you look at your report, you can look for meaning in it, right? Okay, so when you talk about assessments, we understand that assessments are kind of difficult to do right in the portal, right? A lot of people will use worksheets. And so let me take you to where we have some old worksheets. That's cnumc.org/worksheets. The thing about this is sometimes our forms might change in the future. And I don't know how long this resource, these are old forms. You know, we ran into a problem where things needed to move electronic. And if anybody had some type of paper form, especially if it was current for the year, they'd want to just mail that paper form in. So, but we do have these old worksheets available. I think we're getting to a point where a lot of us are a lot better with submitting online. And so we might be able to have more updated worksheets available in the future, but things take time and we'll just have to see where that goes. But there are worksheets here for you. And you can see they're here for the church conference worksheets and also for your SPRC appointment worksheets. All right. Another thing that you can do is even when you are in the portal, you can often copy paste. I know when I was working in the church office, I didn't know about this worksheet resource, and a trustee came to me and said, hey, I need help. I want to be able to work on this. And I just copy and pasted everything that was in the form into a Word document. And these PDFs, you might need to copy and paste them into a Word document. I really do recommend working on things electronically, because if you type it in, then you can copy and paste your answers into your portal, right? Working on things on papers, that's okay for some people. They'll have to sit there and type it all, but copy and pasting it is going to be easier. And especially when you're working with certain things, it's going to save you time. And especially with evaluations, when you're working as a team, you might want to change what you're saying or writing anyway. I do want to talk a little bit about evaluations, because sometimes I would be asked, oh, how do we use this form? My understanding is that different churches do assessments a little differently. These are right now the assessments, but some churches I've heard will give it to the pastor to kind of look over and self-evaluate, and then the SPRC will also do it, and they'll come together and see what they say. But maybe Shinya might be able to speak a little bit more towards that. Sometimes the SPRC will just do the evaluation straight. But I don't know, Shinya, did you have anything to add to how they should use papers and forms for their evaluations? Because I do know that's a question.
I'm sorry, what's the question? I'm sorry.
So I've been asked,
Yeah.
Your assessment forms, will have the worksheets. Sometimes they don't know how to use them or implement them. I've seen, I remember working with D.S. Blake, he would say, sometimes they'll give them to the pastor will fill out, and the SPRC will see what the pastor says, and then the SPRC fills it out. Sometimes they'll both fill it out at the same time, and they'll come together and they'll talk about it. Of course, I do know the SPRCs, whatever their assessment is their assessment. The pastor does not do their own assessment for the books, but more as an evaluation, and you can kind of see what kind of understanding the pastor has of where they're at.
So the church profile, they should work on it together with the pastor, right?
Yes.
Evaluation, they can do it separately. I know that there was a question about whether or not they should do it with the pastor. You could ask for a permission, right, to have a meeting without the presence of the pastor and work on the evaluation of the pastor. And so you can just fill that out without the pastor's presence, and really the pastor should give permission to do that. Now, what you decide to do in terms of recommendation for the pastor's appointment, they do need to share that information with the pastor after they submit their form.
Mm-hmm. Great. So yes, then this is how you'd put them in. You've got your report. I do want to make clear that the recommendation and the assessment, it shouldn't be done by just one person. It's really a group effort. If you have and this is why it's really important to log in ahead of time. Some people logging in December 1st, oh, let me go in and put in our recommendation. Now this is really a joint thing. So you might be the one with access, but this is for your committee. It's not, as chair, you get to go in and choose whether or not your pastor's saying. Okay. So appointment forms, they are due December 1st. And that's really important. Make sure that they are done. And again, you will see down here that there will be a blue bar. There's this blue bar, and it should let you submit and officially submit all the forms. All the forms actually get submitted at once. You can save them as you go, but they get submitted at once. So you can't officially, if you don't do your church profile, it's not going to let you officially submit your recommendation. So do get in ahead of time. Don't just decide that you're just going to do one form. They're all important. I also want to say that I've seen and know that a lot of you out there go through a lot of things. I have heard of SPRCs who have been ill, needed brain surgery, or going through moves and all sorts of things. And even at my own church, I've seen SPRCs handle tremendous situations. I had an SPRC who turned in their form early due to an upcoming surgery, but she made sure that she still got her forms in. And I am just humbled and amazed by the commitment that some of you have. And I know we're all going through life and it's hard, and forms, they can seem just like extra stuff. But I do know some of you are really committed to this work, and some of you are on point. And I just really appreciate the work that you guys do. And I appreciate, especially when we're punctual. Okay, now I'm going to show you the compensation report. Oh, actually, we're not even going to look at the report. We're going to kind of talk about it. Notice there's so much with the forms. We're just kind of going through an overview of it. We're not even looking at the physical form, but it's important to address. So here we go. Remember, we said we had to click church dashboard. Now, I do want to tell you that this church dashboard, going back and forth between these pages, are especially confusing because they look alike. So sometimes what'll happen is people will be here in their church dashboard and they'll be like, I can't get to my SPRC forms. You just have to go back. Okay. So remember, it's confusing. If you really can't find your forms, log out, close everything out, start all over. You'll find them. So if you're in your church dashboard, you can update church officers. You actually have power to do that as SPRC. It's really the pastor's responsibility to make sure that all of the church officers are reported, especially at the beginning of the year. What happens is if your trustees or you as SPRC don't have access, and also the emails addressed, they disappear, we don't know that you're SPRC anymore. Sometimes people will go in and they will put a term in to start. They say this is a 3 or 4 year term. They'll put it in, and January will roll around, and maybe you have an SPRC or maybe a trustee or somebody else will say, oh, I don't know what happened. It worked in December, but now I don't seem to have access. If you don't have access, it is likely that you're somehow not listed as a church officer anymore, and your pastor should update that. Or if you are a church officer, you might actually be able to help out another church officer. If you have an office administrator at your church, they should have access to, unless they've been bumped off. So I will just say, if you are somebody who updates a church officer, if you started in 2020 and you're ending December in 2023, don't just go and delete. Sometimes people will want to delete people off. We keep record. Anybody who is listed as ending in December 22, they've already been bumped. Like, you can't see it in your officers list, but that record saves. So don't delete somebody from the record, put an end date, and they will disappear. I hope that makes sense, but it's a very important one because we keep the record of who's been trustee and who's been SPRC for your church, and that's very important. All right, compensation reports should be done and submitted again 2 weeks before your annual church conference. On occasion, a compensation report may be tabled, not addressed at the church conference. Maybe there's a unique health insurance issue, or the church conference is really early, like an October 6th date, and maybe the church has been going through some unexpected changes and really just does not know what compensation they can offer at the moment. That's okay. Be in conversation with your DS about that. Overall, a compensation should never be submitted past December 1st, unless you've spoken with your DS and there's really, special circumstances. Compensations, again, do need to be submitted electronically. It's super important. The compensation report could be a training all in itself. Pastor compensation can be pretty complicated, right? A lot of complications have to do with tax law and how things are claimed. When you have compensation questions, they can be answered by your district admin, or you can also go to Board of Pensions. Your district admin will know quite a bit about compensation and the basic filling out of the form, but Board of Pensions is going to be the one who can tell you if you have some type of special unicorn of a case. And maybe your form can be filled out a way that's not typical. Board of Pensions can also work with people. Maybe if you think, oh gosh, healthcare is very expensive, or they're not sure what's in their area, sometimes they work with people and help find them some solutions. So they might be worth giving a call. When I was a district admin, I was trained to look for certain things in a compensation form. But if it was something that seemed out of the ordinary or looked like it may need expertise, I would have to speak with Paul at Board of Pensions. And sometimes the form just wouldn't be right. And then sometimes it was okay in that specific situation. Now, you might be surprised to know that quite a few compensation reports come in and they're incorrect. Even if a form was copied from last year or the previous year, sometimes there's a mistake that hasn't been caught yet. And it needs to be right for things need to be on certain lines for tax purposes. So honestly, I know it can be disheartening to hear, because you go and you submit your compensation report and it's been approved by the committees. It feels like you've talked about it over and over, and you go and submit, and then somebody has to call you and say, oh no, it's wrong. But it does happen, trust me, and corrections do need to be made when they're caught. You know, people can have health insurance numbers and things that don't add up, and various other issues. And so here's the thing, if your compensation is not right, you're either going to be going through it again at a special charge conference or trying to adjust it again later on, which is more work and you don't want to do. Or something can happen, like you can get a compensation approved, the health insurance will be wrong, but Board of Pensions will know what was actually selected for health insurance, and they have to bill your church for the actual health insurance plan that was chosen. So if you put on your compensation something that was less and didn't add up, your church is still getting billed for it, and it's something you didn't budget for. And so we want to make sure, we want to work together to make sure that these mistakes do not happen. All right, so make sure that you get your compensation in ahead of time before your church conference. Make sure you get DS approval on it. And then once you get DS approval, you're actually going to go in and you can approve it as the SPRC electronically. Do not approve a compensation at your church conference and then submit it in afterwards. That's way out of order, and that's not the way it goes. The compensations report show up at the bottom under where it says compensation reports here. So you're going to press compensation reports. There's these instructions here, and then you've got compensation reports effective 2023. Usually under here, you'll see a pastor's name. There will be something that says view, edit, and then there's this like nice green button. And let me tell you, that green button, it must be pretty tempting, because sometimes people will press the green button and submit, thinking that it must be like, oh yeah, I'm going to edit this. And it's the submit to DS button. It's just a very appealing button. If you find that you can't work on your compensation report, it seems closed and like you can't adjust it, you might have accidentally submitted it. So if that happens, just email your district admin and say, hey, I think I might have accidentally submitted this to the DS. If you don't have an option that says submit for DS, or it might even say that it was submitted to the DS, all right? But yeah, it does happen. So just be careful in there and take a careful look. And again, after it's submitted, you need to go in there. If the DS approves, you need to approve, because if you don't go in and electronically approve, you might have some difficulties when the next year rolls around. Certain things are supposed to pop up on your screen, and it might still be waiting for you to approve last year's. So you're welcome to go in, log in, make sure that you can log in sometime within the next week. Check to see if you've approved for last year, or if you're a new SPRC, you can go ahead and get your login from Renee. Hold on to your login, hold on to your password. They didn't change last year to the year before. So that might be very helpful for you to make sure that you keep it, because then otherwise you'll have to reach out to somebody. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some common mistakes and tips. And I will say, we're going to go through a short list of common mistakes, tips, but sometimes this one, save your forms, I completely understand. This saving your forms is not very fun. It's a little bit not as user-friendly. We have a wonderful system. We use Brick River, and it allows us to work with our database and our registration and our website and our forms. They're all connected in a really wonderful way. But sometimes, like this save button, you might find a feature that, you know, leaves something left to be desired. So bear with it. I promise you, I will show you how to save your forms. So here we go. If you don't know, this works for a lot of different places, not just here, but often you can save a form where you can print it. So we're here in print, and you actually just change the destination, and you change the destination to save as PDF, and then it will let you save. That is true for our church conference forms. That is true for your compensation report. That is true for your SPRC forms. So just go ahead, take note of that trick. You might find that you can use it other places, not just here. And that's how you can save your forms as PDF. And yes, you need to save your forms. Your records need to be saved at the local church. So work with your church and make sure all of the church conference forms and SPRC forms are being saved at the local church appropriately. Electronically and physical copies, but saving them both ways really is preferred. Often someone will want to see a church profile from last year, but perhaps they weren't SPRC, or maybe they were SPRC and they just simply didn't save it. And it's difficult because you want to be able to reference and also look back and see where your church has been. So keep your record, make a plan, make sure that all of those different types of forms are being saved. Unfortunately, here at the conference, we can't just send everybody their old forms. There's lots of forms. There's lots of you guys. There's lots of churches. So save your forms. And if you're looking for an old form, check with your church first before reaching out to us. So yes, save all of them. Let's look at these other mistakes. And this is the last slide I have for you guys. You guys are really, you're making it. I know it's tough and forms aren't that fun, but I appreciate it that you're hanging in there. So you're going to check for errors and missing fields. It actually recognizes whether or not you put in an email address that is well recognized. So if you put something in there with 2 @ symbols, or you don't put a .org, .com, or a .something, it recognizes that it's not a format of an email address. And so sometimes I've had people call and they say, oh, it says I have an error message. And it's like, well, that doesn't look like a real email address. Let's change that. And then it's fine. Sometimes people will be missing fields. Sometimes they don't select their church. It's there. It's easy sometimes just to miss, but go ahead and select it. Not selecting whether someone is full, half, or quarter time on the compensation. This will definitely make the pension wrong. So, and some of you guys might have some issues. Maybe you have a special retired pastor who's full-time and have a different circumstance. Just make sure you email your district admin and tell them that you need the pension changed, or that they're a retired pastor and they've waived pension. You can do that. But don't just submit it with knowing that it's incorrect. Make sure make sure you contact somebody. Just send them an email. It's really easy. So, but if you don't select the right, if you leave it blank and don't select something, it won't calculate pension correctly. So make sure you do that. And if you find your numbers aren't adding up right, I suggest just saving it, taking some time away and coming back. I'll get calls that are like, man, this system's terrible. It's just not adding right. It doesn't add right. It's $36,000 over. And you just look through it and go, okay, well, it says that your pastor's professional expense is $40,000. I think it's supposed to be $4,000. Yeah. And they're like, yes, well, that's why you're $36,000 over. Sometimes you might just need somebody else to look at it with you. Don't be too discouraged. I know the system might not be perfect, but a lot of times, and other people here and other admins, they'll attest, a lot of times it's user error. So go ahead, take a breath. We do have issues with the system from time to time. I know some of you had issues doing assessments for multiple pastors or something like that. And we've had glitches in the system, and we're really appreciative of your patience when that has happened. But overall, keep in mind, just take a breath, come back to it. So the next error we're going to look at is having too many tabs open or letting the screen go idle. Especially with the church profile, I don't know what it is. You just want to make sure you're saving your work as you go. Sometimes you might, if you walk away, go use the bathroom, I suggest saving it, getting out of it, and then coming back and opening it again. I don't know why, but Brick River doesn't kind of let you know that it's gone idle. Have you ever been in like maybe your bank account or something, and if you're in it for too long, it kind of recognizes and it freezes and it kicks you out? It doesn't kick you out, but it must go idle, because what I'll find is people will finish it and then they won't be able to save it. So you really want to go and do, particularly the church profile, in one sitting if you can. Go ahead, get all of your answers, come on over and go through it. Make sure that you have your answers somewhere else. Just take your time with it. You can't print the church profile and send it to us if it doesn't save. You need to just kind of get it all done in one shot. Make sure you're saving as you're going. Make sure you don't have too many reports and different things open up. X out of everything, start over, and just do the church profile in one shot. One of the other errors that we get a lot is numerical entries. Not the compensation report. The compensation report I know will take periods, but a lot of our reports, no dollar signs, no symbols, no commas, no periods. They just want numbers. And they'll be looking at it and they're saying, I don't understand why there's an error. I just keep out no commas, no symbols, just put in numbers. All right. And then some of those forms ask for a signature, and one of them asks for 2, I think. But even a dot counts as a signature. So sometimes someone will be scrolling through it and they'll press the dot, and maybe they've just gone and they've only filled in some things. Once that dot is there, it kind of recognizes it as a signature, as if you're done. And so then if you save from there, it doesn't let you go back in. So don't sign anything until you're done. If you need multiple signatures on something, tell somebody over the phone everything that was on there, or make sure somebody else that you know has approved of what is on there has seen it, whether on paper or something, and just put their name in there. You can put an initial. I know, because you're trying to sign it and you're trying to sign it with your mouse and you're like, oh. So I've been in the church office before and I've had to like submit some of this, and I would just like either put like my initials or something, because it's really hard to sign with a mouse. If you have an iPad, maybe it's better. I don't know how these forms work well with other devices, but we understand. I don't know if we're going to be able to remove the signatures or exactly why they're there in the future, but for now, this is my advice. These are the issues that we've had in 2022. The other issue that we'll have is I don't have access. I don't have access. Again, your first line of defense with I don't have access is your pastor. Ask them to check if they have you there as a church officer and that your SPRC is still current. Sometimes there was an end date put on there and you're still SPRC, and the reason you don't have access is you're not listed. So, and make sure you have a start. If you're just listed as SPRC and they put you in there without a start date, then you're not active. You're not in it. So how would the system know to email you or to include you? So like I said, it's great, really, like all of our systems work together, but you need to be in there in order to have access. So I really hope that helps. I am so grateful for the work that you are doing. Like I said, I've been on a few church staffs and I have been so grateful. Some of my SPRCs have been really great. And I know that what you do can make a difference in their church, and you are doing such an important thing. Thank you. And, feel free. This training should be up again. So when forms are a little closer, you might want to come and take a refresher.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. And I know that was quite a bit of information for all of you. And so let's just take a deep breath. Let's take a deep breath. We're almost to the end. And so we're just gonna have our Q&A time, and we're gonna have resources presented by Roxanne. And we talked about 4-hour training, but we are 3.5 hours into it. And so thank you again for taking the time to learn the work of the SPRC. Let's take a deep breath. That feels good, doesn't it? Let's take another one. Okay, so we have a lot of great questions that you guys wrote in the chat room, and so we're gonna try to answer as many of them as possible. And it's not gonna be just me. We're gonna have all the presenters that are gonna be answering these questions. And so we're gonna start with, will these slides be available as a reference guide? And yes, these slides are gonna be available afterwards, and we're going to send them to you, and so be on the lookout for that. And if you don't get one, please reach out to us and we'll be sure that you get these slides. Another question is, speak to the one board model and how SPRC operates it. And it's a great question. There is kind of a movement for a lot of the churches to move to rid of the committee structures. We have the SPRC and the Board of Trustees and the Finance and Administrative Council. A lot of churches are moving toward the structure where they combine all the committees into one board. I would say the difficult part is to make sure that even if you have one board model, you do all the work of each of the committees, right? You don't reduce the amount of work that you have. You just find a way to do all of them as one board. And so if you keep that in mind, and so everything that we talked about for as the work of the SPRC, you need to be able to do that as one board. So we're going to move on to, and again, keep sending us your questions. another question that we have is, does any UMC have a common vision of being Christ's disciples? How does a church lose its vision? That's a great question. We have actually a common mission statement, right? Does anybody know what the mission statement of the United Methodist Church is? You can write it down in the chat room if you know what it is. I'll just say it because we don't have a whole lot of time. Make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? Make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And so that is our mission statement. That is for the whole denomination. That's why our denomination exists. And so your vision statement is not going to deviate from that. But your vision statement is going to talk about how you're going to do that in your own context, right? And so maybe your vision is going to say, we are going to reach out to our neighborhood, 3 mile radius of our church, or something along that line, right? How are you going to make that possible, that mission statement possible in your own context? And that's going to be your vision. How does a church lose its vision? There was somebody that was commenting on this earlier, but to find a way to keep it alive, right? If you're not talking about it often enough, churches can begin to lose its vision. The best way to keep your vision alive is to incorporate it in every aspect of the church's ministry, right? And so you could start a committee by stating your vision statement. You can start a worship service by stating your vision statement. Find ways, right, to keep it alive and to implement it as much as possible in all aspects of church's ministry. There was a question about, by the way, David, feel free to just join and whatever that you want to share, but what is a professing member, right? We actually have a very specific way for a person to join a United Methodist Church. And then so you have to go through a membership class, and then you have to take a vow, right? That is written in the hymnal, in the book of worship. And then that's how you become a member of the church. Now, not all the churches follow kind of the strict guidelines, but as much as possible, it's good to know that the professing members are professing members. And we also have a process of eliminating a member, right? We vote on it at the charge conference or church conference. And then so we do take membership seriously. And those that are members are professing members of a congregation, right? Is the pastor a voting member on all issues? That's a great question. It depends. It depends. But generally, yes. Generally, yes. A pastor is a voting member on all issues. But there's some, I would say, that you want to stay away from as pastors. Yeah, maybe I'll think a little more on that question and get back to you in writing, so you can know, what the pastor votes on and what the pastor does not vote on. I'll have to think about it and get back to you. For SPRC membership, how about siblings not in the same household? What? For SPRC membership, how about siblings not in the same household? No. Sorry about that. If you're siblings, if you're related, you cannot be on the committee together. Can or cannot the chair vote? Yes, the chair of the SPRC can vote. They should vote. If such a high percentage of pastors are indirect communicators, shouldn't this be part of their training when in seminary and through mentorship through their professional work? Yes, that's a great question. We actually have cross-racial, cross-cultural trainings that we require for pastors as they're going into a ministry, especially when they are appointed to a context that is different than the culture that they come from. And SPRCs are encouraged to participate in that training as well. Okay, why is our vote for pastors to leave not respected by the conference? That is a good question. Why is it that the vote to pass for pastors leave not respected by the conference? Again, we do listen to what you say. And actually there are 3 recommendations that we have for pastors' appointments. The SPRC, right, comes up with a recommendation for their pastor. That's one. And the pastor makes recommendation for himself or herself about the next year. And also a DS makes recommendation for the pastor. But ultimately, we do listen to these recommendations, but they're recommendations, right? They're not the final word. And ultimately, it's the bishop that decides. And so there may be some reasons that you don't know about that we wanted to keep the pastor in your congregation, even as you requested to have the pastor, recommended to have the pastor be moved. Okay, another question is, although there is a tendency, why do some congregations have the same pastor for 10 years or more? That's a great question. David, do you want to answer that one?
Well, as you mentioned in the previous pastor, consideration of a request from the congregation and the DS and the bishop. And it's the same thing here, that the pastor will submit his request whether to remain or to move. SPRC also submit their recommendation whether to have the pastor remain or to move. And then the district superintendent look at the ministry of the congregation and the bishop and the cabinet. They all look at that, and some of those they're doing well. So why bother? Just keep them going unless there is a request, or sometimes there will be a need somewhere, even though you request to have the pastor remain. There may be a need somewhere that the cabinet would see that the pastor of that church would probably fit for another congregation, another appointment. Then they may take that pastor, even though you have requested or the pastor requested to remain. So it depends on the overall mission of the conference, of the church, where that pastor best suited to serve.
The longest that I've seen is Pastor Kathy Morris at Dixon. She stayed in that church, stayed in that appointment for 35 years. And obviously, I was alive when she started, but I certainly wasn't the DS at the time she started. And so I don't really know, right, that every single conversation that happened, because we talk about it every year, right, why she was asked to return to Dixon. But, right, some appointments are longer than others and for various reasons. And so, I don't know the specific case, but it really is contextual. How do you handle a pastor who does not maintain confidentiality? Ooh, I don't know how to. That's a good one. How do you handle a pastor who does not maintain confidentiality? You just got to talk to your DS, and it's a supervisory issue. And so if it's someone in my district, I will have to have a conversation with that pastor.
Yeah, there is also a question below if only the chair of the SPRC called the district superintendent. Each DS may have their own preference, but I would rather have the chair of the committee call so that it's a joint decision, and also make sure that the committee had already done something to get into a just resolution or solve the situation. And when that doesn't work, then that's when the chair call the DS, and that call is for the whole committee. It's not just a personal call from the chair. So that would be helpful if the chair contacted the DS, and then the DS will then intervene in whatever way that would help to bring a resolution for whatever issue that is being addressed.
Okay, the next question is, how often do we do an evaluation? Not every year? Why optional? I think when people are saying optional, that was referring
I
to,
think,
yeah.
sorry, I know it. I think I know what happened here.
Yeah,
So this is, again, we're working with the system that we have on the forms. And some of them would say multi-optional. And some of them would say blue required. We ran into an issue with Brick River. It used to say required, and then we had a line that said multi-optional. And if we had both, a line that said required and one for multi, it wasn't letting people put in multiple. So we had to just put a multi, and I don't know why that label is the way it is. It's something that hopefully we will get fixed for next year, but yes, your assessment does need to be done every year. It is not optional. If you have more than one person appointed at your church, each person needs an assessment.
Right, and the reason,
and their appointments are done. You also need an appointment recommendation for each, right?
Yeah, and then so they need to do evaluation every year because at the basic level, appointments are made every year, right? We don't do 5-year appointments. We don't do, they might stay in appointment in the same appointment for 5 years. That's because we made the decision 5 times, right? For that person to come back to that church. And then so every year we have to, the conference needs to assess the appointment of every pastor. And then so that's why you need to do evaluation every year. For clarification, entire SPRC committee does the evaluation. The chair enters info in the portal, and that's with a question mark. That is absolutely true. You don't,
unless your chair is not is not computer, savvy. I really love, I saw Casey Bolt, shout out, hello, how are you? He was saying, he put in the comments, do a Zoom meeting with a share screen, just like we've been sharing screens here now. You can have a Zoom meeting with your SPRC and you guys can fill it out together. You can, and one person can scribe and you can share the screen. That is an excellent, excellent idea. I love it. I will be taking that note and making note of it and putting that suggestion everywhere. Thank you, problem solver.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about small churches, and I think it's very important. Small churches to have less than 5 SPRC members, right? Small churches to have less than 5 SPRC members. It's difficult to come up with kind of a blanket rule, but what I think would be helpful is for you to have a conversation with your pastor and the pastor to have a conversation with the DS to figure out, right, what is going to be the solution for the church. Because let's say, you go down from 5 to 4. Is 3 okay? Is 2 okay? It gets to a point where it's very difficult to do any kind of substantial SPRC work. And so if you're struggling to have 5 members, SPRC members, and maybe other committees have more members, right? Maybe it's about the time that you meet. I don't really know what the context is, but speak with your pastor and the pastor to speak with the DS to try to figure out a solution together. Okay, so we're actually coming to the end of our training. We're going to have resources section that is going to be so important. I want to make sure that we have a resources section that Roxanne is going to present. And so here's what we're going to do. It turns out that we have way more questions than we could answer in this short time that we have. And so
can I do a little clarification though? That's not a question because I want to make sure.
So we're going to take all the questions that were put into the chat room, and then we're going to try to answer them And then we're going to send the answers to you, right? So that you have all the answers to the questions that you
Yeah,
have.
I just want to
Yeah.
make sure I didn't confuse people. I saw somebody have a confusion about what minutes get uploaded into your portal. And this is important because I don't want you to think and call and think that every meeting that you had gets uploaded. It's just the annual church conference minutes that gets uploaded into the church conference portal.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jesse. And so again, we're going to do this resource section, and then we're going to do the best we can, right, to try to answer all of the questions that came up. And if you have other questions afterward, right, please send them to us and we'll try to answer all the questions. And so we're going to listen to the resources and we'll close with a prayer because I want to honor, right, 4 hours is long enough. Okay, so Roxanne, go ahead.
Okay, hello, everybody. Let's stretch. Check out all the heebie-jeebies. Reconcentrate yourself. We're almost there. I promise to go very quickly through this, but I do want to draw your attention to everything because this is a new resource that we've just been developing with the Leadership Development Office. My name's Roxanne. I'm with Florin UMC, but I'm working as the resource consultant for leadership development. So before we send you off today, we'd like to equip you with some of the information and resources. I don't know about you, but after a day of training, I'm filled with excitement, anticipation to do something new. And within a few days, I've forgotten everything. So this is where you will be going to find out further information or just to re-energize that memory. Here are our website resources, and I'm going to go very low tech now. You'll all be able to tell that I do children's time from time to time. If you can see this, this is our website. Very easy to figure out. cnumc.org, leadership-development. And on there, you will find all the resources you need to concentrate on. At the very top of it, we've got columns for laity, clergy. Both of those are specific info for those two areas. Intercultural competency, which is in progress. And then courses on training, which will take you to the registration page. And then probably the one you very much want to concentrate on is the last one, resource. This covers 5 topics. That would be general resources. All of these are websites, webinars, books, etc. And then ones that are specific to either SPRC, finance, trustees, or lay leader. The 3 committees there have information on site, ready to go for your perusal. Lay leader is still a work in progress. But these, again, will contain various types of information on your specific role. Please look at those, take a look at those, encourage your committees to look at those, and then go on and encourage your people and your congregation to especially look at the laity section that will show information on various classes. Let's go on to the next slide. So we are equipped for God's work. Well, perhaps you've actually heard the expression that God calls the equipped and equips the called. So if either you are looking toward doing some new type of ministry, if you feel called in a new direction, this is where you will start your response with ongoing education and training. We will go on to the lay servant ministries. This is what we're all about. This is where laity get to know more about our Methodist movement, more about God's role in our lives, more about prayer ministry, how to deliver a message to your congregation, and a variety of different courses. We are called to be lay servants, are actually to be servant leaders, with Jesus as our ultimate example of this. And so this gives us the training in that direction. We'll go on, Jesse. So you ask, where do I begin? How can I be this servant leader? The first course that we recommend is the basic lay servant course. And this gives you the foundation of it all. It starts from John Wesley on to even the beginnings of how to give a message. It's either a 2-day course or like 2 Saturdays in a row, or it can sometimes be on weeknights, 4 weeknights in a row. Actually, it should be a course that's taken by all. It's got some very good materials in this book here. And along with that, it's important for people to be aware of what their spiritual gifts are. This is my thing right now. If we as a church don't know where we are gifted, it is sometimes difficult to know where we can serve best. And this is also a great way for you to get new members on your team who didn't know that they had skills in leadership, who didn't know they could pray. These are spiritual gifts, helps you to make yourself aware and then further make your church aware of where God has gifted you. I think right now that this is essential for all of us. So please encourage both your members of these 2 classes. And then following those, if people feel inspired, if they hear the Holy Spirit calling them to go on to more advanced courses, they can follow those through there. And that is all under that laity headline. We'll go on to the next slide, because right now we want to have a testimonial from our friend Tony, who recently took the basic lay leader course. Be able to get there, JC.
Back in November, and it was a great experience. Our pastor, April.
On there a second.
Hi, my name is Tony Gerard, and I am a lay leader at the Church of the Joyful Healer in McKinleyville. And I took the lay servant basic training back in November, and it was a great experience. Our pastor, April Souza, had been trying to get me to take it for quite a while, and I finally said yes, and I'm very glad that I did. It was a great experience to understand deeper what it means to be in leadership in the church, the different types of leadership, coupled with different types of ministry. It was very interesting. Our instructor was Mary Cheng. Great leadership skills, and I really enjoyed the class. At first, it was during the week after work. I didn't think I'd be up for it, but every time I was pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed it, and it was that spiritual boost that I needed in the midweek. So I would encourage anybody who's considering it to do the class, and I've committed to signing up for additional courses, and I'm looking forward to doing those as well. I think one of the best parts of it was getting to meet other folks from around the conference. There were such a cross section of people that I got to talk with in the breakout rooms and share some of our spiritual journeys, our churches, and just our love of Jesus together. I really enjoyed it. One of the highlights was our first breakout room was with a gentleman who was celebrating his honeymoon in Africa. but he called in for the meeting. So it was an incredible experience. I highly recommend it. And like I said, I'll look forward to doing more classes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A testimonial, and then we have some basic lay servant classes for this basic course. The next ones are in July, and then we have other ones in October. For spiritual gifts, we have some in as soon as February. So do look at that resource. We have 2 upcoming courses, one on intercultural awareness and communication. As D.S. David was speaking to, this is one of our gifts and sometimes challenges as a conference. So you can get a lot of good information there, as well as intercultural conflicts. And to show you just how alive and well our connection is, we will move on to the next slide. Actually, I'm sorry. Can we go back one there, JC? We have our connection extends not just within our conference here, but of course to the whole conference, or to the whole general conference. We have our UMC Discipleship Ministries, another excellent resource, and they do webinars just virtually every month. We have 2 upcoming ones, one specifically for clergy, staying on top of your taxes, and also another timely one, the church audit. It's easier than you think. That's something you might well want to pay real attention to. Okay, then let's go to the next slide. What does connectionalism mean to you? This has been a strong point starting from last night, moving into today. And so for our very last video here, we're having pastors speak about what connectionalism is to you. Our director, Mary Cheng, took the opportunity of the pastors meeting just this week and interviewed a couple of pastors. So let's listen and see what they
Roxanne,
yes.
So the video is 10 minutes, and so we're at the end, and so I think we're not going to be able to show it.
We will post this.
Okay, that'll be great.
As a resource.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you so much. Was there anything else that you wanted to share for the resources? It's been very helpful.
I think that's it. Just be sure to always look at these resources. We'll keep them updated. If you have any questions, write to our admin or your DS's admin. Thank you.
And then we have evaluation. We want to hear from you about your thoughts about this training. If there are things that you recommend us to do next time, we want you to write it down, and you can get there. You can scan it, and then you can get to the evaluation form. So we're going to close with prayer. Again, I just want to thank you for being here, taking the time to learn about the work of the SPRC, because it is incredibly, incredibly important. And this is, again, the longest training that I've ever been part of, 4 hours. And so thank you for taking the time to do this training. And if you have questions, continue to write to us, and then we'll try to answer them as soon as possible. And so let's close with a prayer. Will you join me in prayer? Let's pray together. Lord, we give you thanks for bringing us together to do this work together. This is a work that we do together. This is a connectional church. You've called us to be a church together and learn together, to teach. So Lord, we ask you to continue to guide our work through all the ups and downs, the challenges of the world, the challenges of the denomination. Lord, we know that you have an answer. You always have an answer. And help us to look to you. Help us to be guided by you. Help us to receive your grace in all that we do. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone.